The afternoon sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the busy sidewalk. Tommy sat on his usual spot near the corner of the street, his violin resting comfortably under his chin. He'd been playing here for almost 3 years now, and he knew this corner better than he knew his own apartment. The coffee shop behind him always had the smell of fresh pastries drifting out, mixing with the city sounds of car horns and people chattering as they walked by. Tommy drew his bow across the strings, playing a soft melody he'd learned from his grandmother years ago. His violin case lay open in front of him, a few dollar bills and some coins scattered inside. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. Some days were better than others. Today had been pretty average so far, nothing special. A few tourists had stopped to listen, dropped some money, and moved on. That's how it usually went. He'd just finished one song and was about to start another when something caught his eye. A young kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, was standing near the newspaper stand across the way. The boy wasn't moving, just standing there frozen like a statue. Most kids were running around, pulling on their parents' hands or staring at their phones. But this one was different. He looked absolutely terrified. Tommy stopped playing and watched for a moment. The kid was wearing clothes that definitely stood out. A navy blue blazer that looked expensive, the kind with brass buttons that probably cost more than Tommy's rent. His sneakers were those designer ones Tommy had seen in store windows, the ones with the price tags that made him laugh. Everything about this kid screamed money, but right now, he just looked scared out of his mind. The boy's head kept turning left and right, like he was looking for someone or maybe trying to figure out where he was. His hands were shaking. Tommy could see that even from across the street. The kid's eyes were wide and he kept biting his lower lip. Tommy had seen plenty of lost tourists on this corner, plenty of confused people trying to find their way. But this felt different. This felt wrong. Their eyes met across the busy sidewalk. For just a second, Tommy and the boy locked eyes and Tommy could see the pure panic there. Before Tommy could even think about what to do, the kid suddenly bolted. He ran straight across the street, dodging between people and nearly getting clipped by a taxi. The driver honked angrily, but the kid didn't even seem to notice. He ran right up to Tommy and grabbed his arm with both hands. His grip was surprisingly strong for such a small kid. His fingers dug into Tommy's jacket sleeve like he was holding onto a life raft in the middle of the ocean. "Please," the boy whispered, his voice shaking so badly Tommy could barely understand him. "Please help me. They're following me." Tommy's mind raced. Who was following him? Was this kid in actual danger or was he just lost and scared? Tommy looked around quickly, trying to see what the boy was talking about. The sidewalk was crowded as usual. Office workers heading home, tourists taking photos, delivery guys pushing carts. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first glance. "Hey, it's okay," Tommy said softly, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was starting to pound. "What's wrong? Are you lost?" The boy shook his head frantically. No, they're coming. Please, I need help." That's when Tommy saw them. 3 men, all wearing dark suits and sunglasses, moving through the crowd with purpose. They weren't casual walkers. They were hunting. Their eyes were scanning the sidewalk and they were moving fast, pushing past people without apologizing. All 3 of them were big, the kind of big that comes from spending hours in a gym. They moved like professionals, like people who knew exactly what they were doing, and they were all looking in Tommy's direction. Tommy's instincts kicked in before his brain could catch up. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe it was the smartest thing he ever did, but he didn't stop to think about it. This kid was terrified, and those men looked like trouble. That was all Tommy needed to know. "Hold on tight," Tommy said quickly. He grabbed his violin and shoved it into the case, not even bothering to be gentle with it. His fingers fumbled with the latches as he snapped it shut. The kid was still gripping his arm, and Tommy could feel him trembling. "Don't let them take me," the boy pleaded, and there were tears running down his cheeks now. "Please don't let them take me." Tommy slung his violin case over his shoulder and grabbed the boy's hand. "Come on, we're leaving. Stay close to me." The subway entrance was just half a block away. Tommy had used it 1,000 times, knew every twist and turn down there. If they could just make it to the stairs, they might have a chance. He pulled the boy along, walking fast but trying not to run. Running would make them obvious, would make them stand out even more. Behind them, Tommy heard a man's voice call out, "Hey, stop." That made his decision easy. Tommy broke into a run and the boy ran with him. They weaved between people, Tommy muttering quick apologies as they went. An older woman gasped as they rushed past her. A businessman cursed when Tommy's violin case nearly hit him, but Tommy didn't slow down. The subway entrance was right there, the stairs leading down into the cool darkness below. Tommy could hear heavy footsteps behind them now, getting closer. The men were running too, and they were faster. Of course they were faster. They were professionals, and Tommy was just a street musician who spent most of his time sitting down. They hit the stairs, and Tommy practically flew down them, his free hand on the railing to keep from falling. The boy stumbled once, but Tommy caught him, half dragging him down. The fluorescent lights of the subway station flickered overhead as they reached the bottom. The usual smell of the underground hit them, that mix of metal and concrete and too many people in one place. Tommy could hear the men on the stairs behind them. Their footsteps echoed in the stairwell, heavy and fast. Tommy's mind was racing. Which way? The platform was ahead, but a train might not come for minutes. They needed somewhere to hide, somewhere to disappear. He spotted a maintenance corridor off to the side, one of those areas marked with yellow tape and warning signs that most people ignored. Without hesitating, Tommy pulled the boy toward it. They ducked under the tape and pressed themselves against the wall, both of them breathing hard. The men thundered past, their shoes loud on the concrete floor. Tommy held his breath, feeling the boy do the same next to him. The kid was shaking so hard Tommy could feel it through both their jackets. Tommy put a finger to his lips, signaling the boy to stay quiet. Through the gap in the maintenance corridor, Tommy watched the three men slow down, looking around the platform. They were talking to each other now, but Tommy couldn't hear what they were saying over the ambient noise of the subway. One of them pulled out a phone and started talking into it. Another one walked further down the platform, checking behind pillars and looking into the waiting train cars. Tommy's heart was hammering so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. What had he just gotten himself into? Who were these people? What did they want with this kid? And more importantly, what was he supposed to do now? The boy looked up at him with those terrified eyes, and Tommy knew he couldn't just abandon him. Whatever was happening here, this kid needed help. And somehow Tommy was now the only person standing between him and those three. Men in suits. He just hoped he'd made the right choice. They stayed hidden in that maintenance corridor for what? Felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. Tommy kept his hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling every tremor that ran through the kid's small body. The three men in suits were still on the platform, still searching. One of them kept talking on his phone, his face serious and focused. Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that this was way bigger than just a lost kid. Finally, the men moved away, heading toward the far end of the platform. Tommy saw his chance. He squeezed the boy's shoulder gently and whispered, "We're going to walk out of here nice and slow. Stay right next to me, and if I say run, you run, got it?" The boy nodded, his eyes still wide with fear but showing a bit of trust now too. That trust made Tommy's stomach twist with worry. What if he was making things worse? What if he was doing the exact wrong thing? But looking at the terror on this kid's face, Tommy knew he couldn't just hand him over to those men, not until he understood what was really going on. They stepped out of the maintenance corridor and walked toward the opposite exit, the one that led to a different street. Tommy kept his head down, his violin case held close. The boy stayed pressed against his side, almost hiding behind Tommy's jacket. They made it to the stairs and climbed up slowly, trying to blend in with the other people using the subway. When they emerged back into the daylight, Tommy's eyes scanned the street quickly. No sign of the men in suits. At least not yet. He knew they wouldn't give up that easily. People like that never did. "Okay," Tommy said quietly, still walking. "We need to get somewhere safe. Somewhere we can figure this out." "Where?" the boy asked, his voice small and shaky. Tommy thought fast. His apartment was about 20 minutes away by subway, but he didn't want to risk going back underground. Those men might be waiting at other stations. A taxi would be faster but more expensive, and Tommy only had about $40 in his pocket from today's playing. Still, this seemed like the time to spend it. He flagged down a yellow cab that was cruising by. The driver, a tired-looking man with gray hair, pulled over. Tommy and the boy climbed into the back seat, and Tommy gave his address in Brooklyn. As the cab pulled away from the curb, Tommy looked out the back window. Still no sign of the suited men, but his heart wouldn't stop racing. The boy was staring at his hands in his lap, tears still wet on his cheeks. Tommy felt a wave of sympathy wash over him. Whatever was happening, this kid was genuinely terrified. "Hey," Tommy said softly. "You're safe now, okay? Nobody's going to hurt you while I'm around." The boy looked up at him and something in his expression shifted. A little bit of the fear melted away, replaced by exhaustion. "Thank you," he whispered. "I didn't know what to do." "What's your name, kid?" Tommy asked. There was a pause. The boy seemed to be deciding whether to answer. Finally, he said, "Danny, my name's Danny." "Okay, Danny, I'm Tommy. Can you tell me what happened?" "Why were those men chasing you?" Danny's face crumpled and fresh tears started falling. "I don't know. I got lost and then I saw them following me and I got scared. I thought maybe they were trying to take me." "Take you where? Do you know them?" Danny shook his head hard. "I don't think so. I don't recognize them. But they kept getting closer and I panicked." Tommy's mind was spinning with possibilities, none of them good. Kidnappers? But Danny's clothes suggested his family had money. Maybe he was a target because of that? Or maybe those men were looking for someone else entirely, and Danny just happened to look like whoever they were searching for. The cab weaved through traffic, heading toward Brooklyn. Tommy kept checking the back window, but he didn't see anyone following them. That should have made him feel better, but it didn't. People with resources, people who could afford 3 big men in expensive suits, they had ways of finding people. Ways Tommy probably couldn't even imagine. They arrived at Tommy's apartment building, a rundown 5-story walk-up that had seen better days. Tommy paid the driver, using up most of his cash, and led Danny inside. The lobby smelled like old carpet and someone's cooking, probably Mrs. Rodriguez on the 2nd floor. She always made too much food and the smell drifted through the whole building. Tommy's apartment was on the 4th floor. By the time they reached his door, both of them were breathing hard from climbing the stairs. Tommy's hand shook slightly as he unlocked the door. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been this nervous in his own building. The apartment wasn't much. One room that served as bedroom and living room, a tiny kitchen area with a hot plate and a mini fridge, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it was clean and it was private, and right now that's all that mattered. "Sit down," Tommy said, gesturing to the worn couch that he'd found on the street 3 years ago. Danny sat down carefully, looking around the small space with wide eyes. Tommy went to the kitchen and filled a glass with water from the tap. His hands were steadier now that they were inside, behind a locked door. He brought the water to Danny, who took it with both hands and drank like he hadn't had water in days. The kid must have been running on pure adrenaline up until now. Tommy sat down in the chair across from the couch and tried to figure out what to do next. "Danny," he said gently, "I need you to tell me everything. Where do you live? Where are your parents? How did you end up alone on that street corner?" Danny set down the empty glass and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked so small sitting there on Tommy's couch, swallowed up by that expensive blazer. "I live in Manhattan," he said quietly. "The Upper East Side. My dad's office is downtown and sometimes I go there after school. Today I got bored waiting for him to finish a meeting. I wanted to see the city, you know? Just walk around a little." Tommy nodded, trying to stay patient even though his mind was screaming at him to get more information faster. "Okay, so you left your dad's office. Then what?" "I just walked. I wasn't planning to go far, but then I turned a corner and I didn't recognize where I was. I tried to find my way back, but everything looked different. That's when I noticed the men. They were behind me, following me. Every time I turned, they turned. Every time I stopped, they stopped. Did they try to talk to you? Did they say anything?" Danny nodded. "One of them called out my name. He said, 'Danny, wait!' But I didn't recognize his voice and it scared me. So I ran." Tommy leaned back in his chair, processing this. The men knew Danny's name. That was either very good or very bad, and Tommy couldn't figure out which. If they were kidnappers, knowing his name made sense if they'd been stalking him. But if they were something else, something legitimate, why would Danny be so afraid? "Danny," Tommy said carefully, "is there any reason someone would want to hurt you? Or your family?" The boy's face went pale. "My dad. He's got a lot of money. He owns a big company. People are always trying to get to him through me. That's why I have—" Danny trailed off, looking down at his feet. Tommy followed his gaze and noticed something he hadn't seen before. There was a small electronic device attached to Danny's shoe, barely visible under the laces. "What is that?" Tommy asked. "A tracker," Danny admitted quietly. "My dad makes me wear it all the time, in case something happens." Tommy's blood ran cold. A tracker, which meant that right now, at this very moment, someone knew exactly where Danny was. Someone knew he was in this apartment. And if those men were looking for Danny, they probably had access to that tracker. "Danny," Tommy said, his voice tight with urgency. "Does your dad know you're missing? Did you tell anyone you were leaving his office?" Danny shook his head miserably. "No, I just wanted a little adventure. I was going to be back before he finished his meeting. He wouldn't have even known I was gone." Tommy stood up and went to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain to look down at the street. His heart sank. There, parked across the street, was a black SUV that definitely hadn't been there when they arrived. As he watched, one of the men in suits got out of the passenger side and looked up at the building. They'd found them. Of course they had. The tracker had led them right here. Tommy's mind raced. He needed to make a decision, and he needed to make it fast. Should he let the men come up? Should he call the police? Should he try to run again? But looking at Danny, seeing how exhausted and scared the kid was, Tommy realized running wasn't really an option anymore. He walked back to the couch and sat down next to Danny. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "Those men are outside. They found us because of your tracker. Now I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you have any reason to believe those men want to hurt you?" Danny looked confused. I don't know. I just got scared when I was lost. You thought they might be bad guys," Tommy finished for him. "But what if they're not? What if they're looking for you because your dad sent them? What if they're trying to bring you home safely?" The idea seemed to hit Danny like a physical blow. His face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, realization, and then horror. "Oh no," he whispered. "Oh no, oh no. What if they're my dad's security? What if I've been running from the people trying to help me?" Before Tommy could respond, there was a knock on his door. Not a loud, aggressive knock, just a firm, professional knock. Then a voice called out, "Mr. Tommy Chen, my name is James. I'm head of security for the Montgomery family. We know Danny is with you. We're not here to cause trouble. We just want to make sure Danny gets home safely." Tommy and Danny stared at each other. The Montgomery family. So that was Danny's last name. And if this James person was telling the truth, then Tommy had just spent the last hour helping a kid run away from his own protection detail. This was either about to get a lot better, or a whole lot worse. Tommy stood frozen in the middle of his tiny apartment, staring at the door. Danny had gone completely pale, his hands gripping the edge of the couch cushion so hard his knuckles were white. The knock came again, patient but insistent. "Mr. Chen," the voice called again, calm and professional. "I understand this situation must be confusing and frightening, but I promise you we mean no harm to either of you. Danny's father is extremely worried. We've been searching for him for over 2 hours now." 2 hours. Tommy looked at his watch and realized with a jolt that he'd lost track of time completely. The sun was starting to set outside his window, painting the room in orange and red light. Danny's father must be losing his mind right now. "Danny," Tommy said quietly, crouching down so he was at eye level with the boy, "I need you to think really carefully. Have you ever seen these men before? Around your house, maybe? Or your dad's office?" Danny's face scrunched up as he thought. Maybe. Dad always has security people around. They kind of blend in after a while. I don't really pay attention to them." That made sense. If you grew up with bodyguards, they'd just become part of the background eventually, like furniture that happened to be able to walk and talk. Another knock, and this time a different voice joined in. Danny, buddy, it's me. It's your dad." Danny's head snapped up so fast Tommy heard his neck crack. The boy's eyes went wide. Not with fear this time, but with recognition and something that looked like guilt. "Dad," he called out, his voice breaking. "Yeah, buddy, it's me. I've been so worried about you. Are you okay in there?" Danny looked at Tommy, tears forming in his eyes again. This time they weren't tears of fear, but of shame. "I messed up," he whispered to Tommy. "I messed up really bad." Tommy felt a weight lift off his shoulders and settle somewhere else, maybe in his stomach where it twisted into a knot of embarrassment. He'd just kidnapped a kid. Well, not exactly kidnapped, but he'd definitely taken someone's child and hidden them away from their family. Even if his intentions were good, this looked really, really bad. He stood up and walked to the door, his legs feeling shaky. Taking a deep breath, he unlocked the deadbolt and the chain lock, then slowly opened the door. There were 5 people in the hallway. 3 of them were the men in suits from earlier, looking tired but alert. One was a uniformed police officer, a woman with kind eyes and her hand resting casually near her belt. And the fifth was a man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit that was rumpled and wrinkled, his tie loosened, his hair messy like he'd been running his hands through it. His eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted, but the moment the door opened, they lit up with desperate hope. "Danny," the man called past Tommy. "Dad!" Danny scrambled off the couch and ran to the door. Tommy stepped aside and Danny launched himself into his father's arms. The man caught him and held on tight, his eyes squeezing shut. Tommy could see his lips moving, whispering things Tommy couldn't hear, probably things a father says when he thought he might never see his son again. One of the suited men, the oldest one with gray hair at his temples, stepped forward. "Mr. Chen, I'm James Morrison, head of Mr. Montgomery's security detail. I want to thank you for keeping Danny safe." Tommy blinked in surprise. You're thanking me? I thought I was about to get arrested." The police officer smiled slightly. "Nobody's getting arrested today. From what we understand, you were trying to help a child you believed was in danger. That's not a crime." Mr. Montgomery pulled back from hugging Danny but kept one hand firmly on his son's shoulder, like he was afraid Danny might disappear if he let go. He looked at Tommy with eyes that were both grateful and exhausted. "Mr. Chen, may we come inside? I think we all need to sit down and talk about what happened here." Tommy nodded, suddenly very aware of how small and shabby his apartment must look to these people. He stepped back and they all filed in. The 3 security men stayed near the door, professional and alert. The police officer took a position by the window. Mr. Montgomery guided Danny back to the couch and sat down next to him, still holding his hand. Tommy stood awkwardly in his own apartment, not sure what to do with himself. Finally, he pulled out his desk chair and sat down, his violin case still slung over his shoulder. He'd forgotten he was even carrying it. "First," Mr. Montgomery said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to thank you. When Danny disappeared from my office building, I thought—" He paused, swallowing hard. "I thought the worst. We have protocols for this kind of thing, security measures. But Danny slipped out during a shift change, and by the time we realized he was gone, he could have been anywhere." Danny looked down at his lap, shame written all over his face. "I'm sorry, Dad, I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted to see the city for a little while. I thought I'd be back before you even noticed." Mr. Montgomery squeezed his son's hand. "I know, buddy. We'll talk about that later. Right now, I just need you to be safe." He looked back at Tommy. "The tracker in Danny's shoe sent us his location, but in a crowded city, that's still like finding a needle in a haystack. We've been following his signal all afternoon, but we kept missing him. When you took the subway, the signal got confused by all the metal and tunnels." James, the head of security, nodded. "We saw you on the street corner. We were trying to approach slowly, not wanting to scare Danny. But then he ran to you and you both disappeared into the subway. We tried to follow but lost you in the crowd. The tracker brought us to this building about 15 minutes ago," Mr. Montgomery continued. "We weren't sure which apartment, so we had to check with the landlord. That took time." Tommy was starting to understand the whole picture now, and he felt incredibly foolish. "So you weren't trying to hurt Danny, you were trying to bring him home." "Exactly," James said. "Though I can understand why it might have looked suspicious. 3 large men in suits chasing a child. I'd have been suspicious too in your position." The police officer spoke up for the first time since entering. "Mr. Chen, from what Mr. Montgomery has told me, you acted out of concern for a child's safety. You didn't know who these men were, and you made the choice to protect someone you thought was in danger. That shows good character." Tommy didn't feel like it showed good character. He felt like an idiot who'd made everything worse. "I should have called the police right away," he said, "or asked more questions. I saw how scared Danny was and I panicked." "You did what you thought was right," Mr. Montgomery said firmly. "In a world where most people would just walk by, you stopped to help. You put yourself at risk for my son. Do you know how rare that is?" Tommy shook his head. "I didn't really think about it. I just acted." Mr. Montgomery stood up and walked over to Tommy. He pulled out his wallet and started pulling out bills. "Please let me pay you for your time, for your trouble." "No," Tommy said quickly, standing up and backing away slightly. "No, I don't want your money. I didn't help Danny to get paid. I helped him because he was scared." "Then let me replace your violin string," Mr. Montgomery said, gesturing to the case. "I noticed it's broken. And please let me make a donation to a charity of your choice. Something for music programs, maybe?" Tommy looked at his violin case, surprised Mr. Montgomery had noticed such a small detail. "The string broke this morning," he admitted. I've been meaning to fix it, but the good strings are expensive. Consider it done, Mr. Montgomery said. He pulled out a business card and handed it to Tommy. This has my office number. Call tomorrow and my assistant will arrange for a full set of professional strings to be delivered to you. The best quality available. Tommy took the card, feeling overwhelmed. The whole evening had been such a whirlwind he could barely process it. Thank you, he managed to say. But really, you don't have to do anything. Danny stood up from the couch and walked over to Tommy. The boy looked up at him with those big eyes, still red from crying. I'm sorry I got you into trouble, he said quietly. And thank you for being nice to me when I was scared. You didn't have to help me, but you did. Tommy felt a lump form in his throat. He knelt down so he was at Danny's level. You weren't any trouble, kid. I'm just glad you're safe and back with your dad. But maybe next time you want an adventure, tell someone first, okay? Danny nodded seriously. Okay, I promise. Mr. Montgomery put his hand on his son's shoulder again, that protective gesture that probably wouldn't stop for a long time. We should get going. Danny needs to eat something and we both need to decompress from today. He looked at Tommy again. Seriously, Mr. Chen, call my office tomorrow. I want to do something for you. And maybe, James added, we can arrange a proper meeting where we're not all stressed and confused. I'd like to shake your hand properly as one decent person to another. They all headed toward the door. The police officer went first, then the 3 security men. Mr. Montgomery and Danny were the last to leave. At the door, Danny turned back and waved. Bye, Tommy, thanks again. Bye, Danny, stay safe, okay? The door closed and suddenly Tommy was alone in his apartment again. The silence was deafening after all the commotion. He walked to the window and looked down at the street. He watched as the group emerged from the building and got into the black SUV and a police car. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving Tommy's quiet street as peaceful as it had been before this whole crazy afternoon started. Tommy sat down on his couch, right where Danny had been sitting just moments ago. He looked at the business card in his hand, at his violin case propped against the wall, and at his tiny apartment that suddenly felt even smaller than usual. What a day. What an absolutely insane day. And it was only when he finally started to relax that Tommy realized he was shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline finally wearing off. He'd spent hours running on pure instinct, and now that it was over, his body was catching up to what his mind had been through. He pulled out his phone and stared at it for a long moment. He should call someone, tell someone about what just happened. But who would believe him? Hey, I accidentally kidnapped a rich kid today because I thought his bodyguards were kidnappers. Wild, right? No, this was a story he'd have to process on his own first. Maybe in a few days it would seem funny. Maybe in a few weeks it would be a story he could tell at parties. But right now it was just surreal. Tommy stood up and went to his kitchen area. He needed something normal, something routine. He made himself a cup of instant coffee and a peanut butter sandwich, the same thing he ate most nights. As he ate, he thought about Danny, probably eating dinner at some fancy restaurant with his father right now. Or maybe at home in a house that probably had more rooms than Tommy's entire building. 2 completely different worlds had collided today on a street corner in Manhattan, and for just a few hours, a street musician and the son of a wealthy businessman had been on the same team, both trying to stay safe in a city that could sometimes feel overwhelming. Tommy finished his sandwich and looked at the business card again. Would he really call tomorrow? Part of him wanted to just let this whole thing fade away. Go back to his normal life of playing violin on street corners. But another part of him, a part he didn't quite understand yet, felt like this wasn't quite over. Maybe he'd call, maybe he wouldn't. He had until tomorrow to decide. For now, he just wanted to sleep and wake up to find out that yes, this had really happened. And no, he wasn't crazy. Tommy didn't sleep well that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Danny's terrified face or the suited men chasing them through the subway. He kept replaying the entire afternoon in his head, wondering what he could have done differently. Should he have just asked Danny more questions right away? Should he have called the police immediately? The what-ifs kept him awake until well past midnight. When morning finally came, Tommy felt like he'd been hit by a truck. His body ached from all the running yesterday, and his mind felt foggy from lack of sleep. He made himself coffee and sat at his small table, staring at Mr. Montgomery's business card. It sat there like a challenge, asking him what kind of person he wanted to be. Part of him wanted to throw it away and pretend yesterday never happened. Going back to his simple life seemed appealing. But another part of him, the part that had made him help Danny in the first place, knew that wasn't right. Mr. Montgomery wanted to thank him properly. The least Tommy could do was let him. Around 10 in the morning, Tommy picked up his phone and dialed the number on the card. His hands were shaking slightly. He'd never called a business number like this before. What if they didn't remember him? What if they thought he was trying to take advantage? Montgomery Enterprises, how may I direct your call? A woman's voice, professional and pleasant. Hi? My name is Tommy Chen. Mr. Montgomery asked me to call today about violin strings? Even saying it out loud sounded ridiculous to his ears. Oh, Mr. Chen. Yes, we've been expecting your call. Please hold for just a moment. There was a click and soft classical music played in Tommy's ear. He waited, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. Less than 30 seconds later, a different voice came on the line. Mr. Chen, this is Patricia, Mr. Montgomery's assistant. He left very specific instructions that when you called, I was to help you with whatever you needed. He mentioned violin strings. Yeah, Tommy said, still feeling awkward about the whole thing. I mean, yes. One of my strings broke and he offered to replace it. But really, he doesn't have to. Mr. Montgomery insists, Patricia said warmly. He was very clear about this. Now, what kind of violin do you have? And what strings do you prefer? Tommy blinked. He hadn't expected such specific questions. It's just a standard student violin. Nothing fancy. I usually buy whatever strings I can afford, honestly. The brand doesn't matter much to me. There was a pause on the other end. Mr. Chen, would you be willing to bring your violin to our office today? Mr. Montgomery mentioned he'd like to speak with you in person if you're available. And we have a music shop we work with that could look at your instrument and provide you with the best strings for it. Tommy's first instinct was to say no. Going to some fancy office building in Manhattan, facing Mr. Montgomery again after what happened yesterday. It seemed too intimidating. But then he thought about Danny and how the kid had looked so grateful when they said goodbye. Okay, he heard himself say. What time? Would 2 o'clock work for you? I'll send you the address via text message. 2 o'clock works, Tommy agreed, wondering what he was getting himself into. After hanging up, Tommy spent the next few hours in a nervous fog. He cleaned his apartment even though no one would see it. He tried to practice his violin but couldn't concentrate. Finally, he gave up and took a long shower, then put on his best clothes, which wasn't saying much. A clean pair of jeans and a button-down shirt that was only slightly wrinkled. The address Patricia sent him was in Midtown, in one of those glass and steel buildings that seemed to reach up to touch the clouds. Tommy stood outside for a full minute just staring up at it. This was Mr. Montgomery's office. The man must be even wealthier than Tommy had realized. Inside, the lobby was all marble and modern art. Tommy felt completely out of place with his violin case and his worn sneakers. But the security guard at the desk was friendly enough, checking his ID and directing him to the elevators. 35th floor, the guard said. Someone will meet you there. The elevator was so smooth Tommy barely felt it moving. Soft music played overhead and the walls were mirrored, showing him his own nervous reflection. When the doors opened on the 35th floor, he stepped out into a reception area that looked like something from a magazine. A woman in a sharp business suit stood up from behind a curved desk. Mr. Chen? I'm Patricia. Welcome. Mr. Montgomery is just finishing up a call, but he'll be with you shortly. Can I get you some water? Coffee? Water would be great, thanks, Tommy said, his mouth feeling dry. Patricia led him to a seating area with leather chairs that probably cost more than Tommy made in 6 months. She brought him a glass of water with ice and a slice of lemon, served on a small silver tray. Tommy took it carefully, afraid he might spill it on the expensive-looking carpet. He didn't have to wait long. After just a few minutes, a door opened and Mr. Montgomery walked out. He looked different from yesterday, more put together, his suit crisp and his hair neat. But his face lit up with a genuine smile when he saw Tommy. Mr. Chen, thank you so much for coming. He walked over and shook Tommy's hand firmly. Please come into my office. We have a lot to talk about. Mr. Montgomery's office was huge with floor-to-ceiling windows that showed an incredible view of the city. Tommy could see for miles in every direction. There was a large desk, several chairs, and a whole seating area with a couch and coffee table. Please sit, Mr. Montgomery said, gesturing to the couch. He sat in one of the chairs across from it. deliberately choosing not to sit behind his desk. Tommy realized it was a gesture to make this feel less formal, more like a conversation between equals. "First thing," Mr. Montgomery said, "how are you doing? Yesterday was intense for all of us, but especially for you. I've been worried that you might be shaken up by the whole experience." Tommy was surprised by the question. He'd expected to talk about violin strings or maybe receive a polite thank you. He hadn't expected Mr. Montgomery to actually care about how he was feeling. "I'm okay," Tommy said. "I didn't sleep great, but I'm okay." "How's Danny?" Mr. Montgomery's face softened. "He's fine. Grounded for the foreseeable future, but fine. He feels terrible about what happened, about putting you in that position. We had a long talk last night about safety and communication." He leaned forward slightly. "But I need you to understand something, Mr. Chen. What you did yesterday, protecting my son when you thought he was in danger, that's not something I take lightly." "I just did what anyone would do," Tommy said, uncomfortable with the praise. "No," Mr. Montgomery said firmly. "You didn't. Most people would have walked past, or they would have called 911 and washed their hands of it. But you actively put yourself at risk to keep a strange child safe. You ran from what you thought were dangerous men. You brought him to your home, gave him water, tried to comfort him. That's not what anyone would do. That's what a good person does." Tommy felt heat rising to his cheeks. "I'm glad it worked out okay. That's what matters." "It is what matters," Mr. Montgomery agreed. "But I also want to make sure you're taken care of." He picked up a shopping bag that had been sitting by his chair. Tommy hadn't even noticed it before. "This is for you." Tommy took the bag hesitantly and looked inside. There were several packages of violin strings. Not the cheap ones he usually bought, but professional-grade strings that he'd only ever seen in music store windows. The kind that cost more than he made in a week of playing on the street. "Mr. Montgomery, this is too much." "It's not enough," Mr. Montgomery interrupted gently. "And please call me Robert. Mr. Montgomery makes me feel old." He smiled. "I also made a donation in your name to a music education program that provides instruments and lessons to kids who couldn't otherwise afford them. I thought that might be more meaningful than trying to give you cash, which I suspect you'd refuse." He was right about that. Tommy would have refused cash. But a donation to help kids learn music? That felt different. That felt right. "Thank you," Tommy said quietly. That's really generous." "I wanted to do more," Robert admitted. "I wanted to offer you a job or set up some kind of trust fund or something. But my wife pointed out that you'd probably find that insulting. She said you seem like the kind of person who values their independence." Tommy smiled despite himself. "Your wife is smart." "She is," Robert agreed with a laugh. "But I also wanted to invite you to dinner. You, me, my wife Kelly, and Danny. Somewhere nice where we can all sit down as human beings and get to know each other properly. Not in the middle of a crisis, not in a stuffy office. Would you be willing to do that?" The invitation caught Tommy off guard. "You want to have dinner with me? Why?" Robert looked at him seriously. "Because yesterday you showed my family kindness when we needed it most. Because I want Danny to see that good people exist in the world, and I want him to know the man who helped him. And honestly, because I'm curious about you. You're a street musician who plays violin for tips, but you carried yourself yesterday with more courage and integrity than most people I meet in the business world. I'd like to know your story." Tommy didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to refuse, to keep his distance from this world of wealth and office buildings that felt so foreign. But another part of him was curious too. About Danny. About what would make a father so protective. About Robert, who seemed genuinely kind despite his obvious wealth. "Okay," Tommy said. "I'd like that." Robert's face broke into a wide smile. "Excellent. How about Friday night? There's a restaurant downtown that has excellent food and a quiet atmosphere. Nothing too fancy. I promise you won't need a tuxedo or anything." They talked for a few more minutes, exchanging phone numbers and making plans. Robert also gave Tommy the name and address of the music shop that had supplied the strings, telling him that they'd be happy to look at his violin anytime, and that Robert had an account there. As Tommy was getting ready to leave, Robert walked him to the door. "Mr. Chen, Tommy, I just want to say one more thing. What you did yesterday reminded me that there's still real goodness in the world. In my position, I deal with a lot of people who want something from me. Money, connections, influence. But you didn't want anything. You just wanted to help a scared kid. That's rare. Don't lose that." Tommy left the building feeling strange, like he'd just stepped into someone else's life for an hour. He rode the elevator down in silence, walked through the marble lobby, and emerged back onto the street where everything was normal and familiar. He looked at the bag of violin strings in his hand, then up at the building he'd just left. Somewhere up there on the 35th floor was a man who'd almost lost his son yesterday, and that man wanted to have dinner with Tommy, wanted to be friends with him. Life was weird sometimes, really weird. Tommy headed toward the subway, thinking about Friday night and wondering what kind of restaurant someone like Robert Montgomery considered nothing too fancy. He had a feeling it would be the nicest place he'd ever eaten in his life, but more than that, he was thinking about Danny, thinking about how one scared kid had connected two completely different worlds, even if just for a little while, and thinking about how sometimes doing the right thing led to places you never expected to go. He spent the rest of the day back at his usual corner, playing his violin with the old strings since he wanted to save the new ones. People walked by, dropping coins and bills into his case. None of them knew where he'd been that morning, or what had happened the day before. To them, he was just the violin guy, part of the city background, and that was okay. That was good, actually, because Tommy had learned something important. You didn't need to be rich or powerful to make a difference. You just needed to be willing to help when someone needed it. The sun set on another day, and Tommy packed up his violin. He had new strings waiting at home, a dinner invitation for Friday, and a memory of one crazy afternoon that had changed everything. Not bad for a street musician. Friday evening arrived faster than Tommy expected. He'd spent the past few days in a weird state of nervous anticipation, going through his regular routine of playing violin on the street corner, but feeling distracted the whole time. He kept thinking about the dinner, wondering if he'd made a mistake agreeing to it. Robert had texted him the name of the restaurant, some Italian place in the West Village that Tommy had never heard of. When he looked it up online, he couldn't even find prices on the menu. That was never a good sign. It meant the place was so expensive they didn't want to scare people away by listing the numbers. Tommy stood in front of his closet, which was really just a metal rack in the corner of his apartment, staring at his limited options. He had 2 pairs of jeans, both faded, 3 t-shirts, 2 button-down shirts, and 1 pair of khaki pants he'd bought for his cousin's wedding 3 years ago. He pulled out the khakis and the less wrinkled button-down shirt and hoped it would be enough. The subway ride to the West Village felt longer than usual. Tommy clutched his violin case on his lap, even though Robert had told him he didn't need to bring it. It just felt wrong to go somewhere without it, like leaving part of himself behind. The restaurant was tucked into a quiet street lined with trees and old brownstone buildings. From the outside, it looked small and unassuming, with just a simple sign and soft lighting glowing through the windows. Tommy checked the address 3 times to make sure he had the right place. Inside was different. The space was intimate and elegant, with maybe 15 tables total. Soft music played in the background, jazz Tommy noticed, with a really skilled pianist. The walls were exposed brick and the lighting was warm and welcoming. It was fancy, but not in a cold, intimidating way. A hostess in a black dress greeted him immediately. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm meeting the Montgomery family," Tommy said, feeling self-conscious about his clothes despite the friendly atmosphere. Her face brightened instantly. "Of course. They're already here. Please follow me." She led him through the restaurant to a table in a quiet corner. Robert stood up immediately when he saw Tommy approaching, a warm smile on his face. Next to him was a woman with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a simple style. His wife, Kelly, Tommy guessed. And there was Danny wearing a nice shirt and looking nervous but excited. "Tommy," Danny said, half standing in his excitement before his mother gently reminded him to use his manners. "Mr. Chen, welcome," Robert said, shaking his hand. "Please sit. This is my wife, Kelly." Kelly extended her hand with a warm smile. "It's wonderful to finally meet you. Robert and Danny haven't stopped talking about you all week." Tommy shook her hand and sat down, placing his violin case carefully by his chair. "It's nice to meet you too. And please everyone just call me Tommy. Mr. Chen makes me feel like I should be teaching math or something." That got a laugh, and some of the tension in Tommy's shoulders eased. Maybe this wouldn't be as awkward as he'd feared. A waiter appeared with menus and water, and Tommy opened his menu with a sense of dread. But to his relief, while everything was certainly more expensive than what he usually ate, it wasn't as astronomical as he'd feared. Robert must have chosen this place carefully, somewhere nice but not so fancy that Tommy would feel completely out of place. "Order whatever you'd like," Robert said. "This is our treat, obviously. And their pasta is incredible if you're not sure what to get." They made small talk while they looked at menus, safe topics like the weather and the neighborhood and how good the breadbasket was. But once they'd ordered and the waiter had left, Kelly leaned forward slightly. "Tommy, I want to thank you properly for what you did for Danny. As a mother, knowing that there are people like you in the world who would help a child in trouble, it means everything to me." "I really just did what felt right," Tommy said, feeling his face flush. "I saw a scared kid and I wanted to help." "But that's exactly the point," Kelly insisted. "So many people wouldn't have done that. They would have looked away or assumed someone else would handle it. You didn't, you stepped up." Danny, who'd been quietly eating bread, spoke up. "I told all my friends at school about you, about how you helped me even though you didn't know who I was. My friend Alex said his dad told him never to talk to strangers, but I said you were a good stranger." Tommy smiled at that. "Well, your friend Alex's dad isn't wrong about being careful, but I'm glad I could help you. I'm still grounded though," Danny added with a sigh. "For like a month." "That's because you scared us half to death," Kelly said firmly but with love in her voice. "You can't just wander off in New York City, honey, no matter how much you want an adventure." "I know," Danny said quietly. "I'm really sorry. I didn't think it would be such a big deal." Robert reached over and ruffled his son's hair gently. "We know you didn't mean to cause trouble, but that's why we have rules, to keep you safe." The food arrived, and it was even better than Tommy had hoped. He'd ordered the pasta like Robert suggested, and it was the best thing he'd eaten in months. Maybe years. They ate and talked, and slowly Tommy started to relax. The Montgomerys were surprisingly normal once you got past the expensive clothes and the fancy restaurant. They laughed at Danny's jokes. They teased each other gently. They talked about a movie they'd watched last weekend. About halfway through the meal, Kelly asked the question Tommy had been expecting but dreading. "So Tommy, tell us about yourself. How did you end up playing violin on street corners?" Tommy took a sip of water, buying himself a moment to think. "It's not a very exciting story. I studied music in college for 2 years, but I couldn't afford to finish. My dad got sick and I needed to help with medical bills. After he passed, I didn't go back. I started playing on the street because it was the only way I knew how to make money doing something I loved." The table was quiet for a moment. Then Robert said softly, "I'm sorry about your father.